Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with Season 8, Episode 17 of our weekly Q&A videos and or podcasts. If you're on the video, links in the description to check this out on the podcasting platform of your choice, hopefully, unless you listen to a weird one or one that we don't support because Anchor doesn't support it automatically. And if you are on the podcast for some reason, you've never seen our channel before, because apparently that's happened, check out our channel, BDCKR Gaming. I don't know.
And the version on YouTube is we still have the talking, but in the background we've got some gameplay going on.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So that is it for our housekeeping.
Yeah, so I wanted to, I guess this is housekeeping too. Last week I started talking about Susan Palwick and how good Flying in Place was, and how I just finished Mending the Moon, and I really enjoyed that too. What I had meant to mention in the start of Necessary Beggar, so I'd said that it was like a second world fantasy, where our world was the second world, and as I spoke about it, you pointed out a few other examples, and it hadn't occurred to me because I hadn't been thinking about it exactly like that. The problem was, not the problem. The issue is the examples that you brought up and that had sort of totally gone over or had eluded my memory were examples where the trope is kind of played for laughs a little bit, right?
Yeah.
That it's a fish out of water kind of thing. It's still, even though it's our world that they're coming to, it's still the strangeness of the person coming into our world and how odd they are. And what she's done that's really interesting with that is that our world is sort of still a place that needs to be discovered, but you almost get the feeling like our world is the strange one without letting go of the idea that their world is a bit of a strange one too, because it's just alien to us, right? It's totally it's still, we're still discovering it, right? As we read about it, because it's a brand new story. It's not like we're revisiting something that we already knew.
That's a really interesting balance to strike.
Yeah, that's why I thought it was so cool, and it hadn't occurred to me that sort of that little bit of it I hadn't really said properly, and that's why I was so surprised when you came with all the examples. Like, I've seen Enchanted. I totally know that. Like, there's the whole Amy Adams, I can't remember what her princess name was, coming into the world and meeting Patrick Dempsey and stuff. But again, that was the part, because there's a feel to it when you read it that's just a little bit odd, but like in a good way, where I feel like I'm sort of discovering something new. Yeah. That's what I wanted to point out.
Another thing that we talked about last week that we can follow up on quickly, I actually rewatched Sorry to Bother You.
Oh, okay.
Again.
And a third time?
Yeah. And
okay.
I watched it with somebody who's taken like politics classes for university and has done a bunch of like communist readings from a communist professor. And so it was interesting because they had a lot of insight into the perspective of and narrative being told by Boots Riley, the director, because he's a communist too. And so like they had a pretty insightful read on it. And it's interesting because I think going through it the second time and going through it with a more sort of a critical lens and actually like looking at things, sort of knowing where it was going in the shape of it,
right.
I still really enjoyed the movie. There was more stuff where I got what his messaging was a lot more specifically. And, you know, obviously he's an individual with a full set of beliefs, and there's a lot of sort of personal political beliefs that are coming across in the story. Okay. And so I don't necessarily agree with all of his opinions or stances, right? Because, you know, he's another person, and that's just how people handle each other with politics. But I thought it was really interesting, and I did still enjoy it the second time, and it was worth going through a second time. And the movie just does have a really cool aesthetic. Another thing that I didn't have perspective on is the person that I was watching it said that a lot of the weirdness and stuff was actually less unexpected because they had been to like smaller like weird like political like film festival films before, right? And they tend to actually it does come from that same sort of tradition where in that context a lot of it is actually not expected but less out there. But it's not out of left field.
Okay, so that's really interesting, right? Because that's one of the things that separates genres and why genres can be so successful but can be very alienating for people. I mean, you brought up the other point too, right? That I wanted to to touch on is that the really good stuff is the stuff that rewards revisiting.
Yeah.
Like when you come back to it, you can get something different out of it, and it was all there to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's even better because when you come back to it, you bring something new yourself if you come at a different stage in your life. So some of the difficulty that people have with, say, science fiction or comic books or whatever, people who aren't used to reading, because that group is, I mean, comic books are really sort of mainstream now. Whatever you might have thought when, like in the 80s, if people thought it was not cool to read comic books because they were for kids, clearly that time has passed. But that there's every kind of genre has its own tropes where people who are familiar with it, they totally expect it, and it just, there's no work at all involved in getting it. And it's funny too, right? Because it changes how you appreciate something, because a lot of times if something is a lot of other people liked, that's sort of got a general reputation for being something of good quality, all you have to do to screw it up for somebody is to give them the wrong expectation going in.
Yeah.
And it can completely spoil the experience.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and there's also a subset of those pieces of media that are really good, but get better the less expectations you have going into them.
Right. And all right, so I'm going to connect it back to Injustice, because it reminds me, I'm feeling a little nostalgic, it reminds me of the times when we used to have a lot more views on our videos, and there was I guess a lot higher expectations in terms of the kind of glitch value or the how fast you'd be able to get power credits or whatever, right? Because I still remember when we had more views, the percentage of negative comments and percentage of down votes was much higher. Yeah. And that once we started doing this kind of stuff like what we're doing right now.
Yeah, nobody watches it without knowing exactly what they're getting into.
Right. That's sort of the point. This is exactly, so besides the people who hate watch us.
Oh, I forget. There was that one guy who would always just be like, you guys are dumb and you talk too much. I forget his name, but that was always kind of fun. Yeah. And he came back so often to tell us that we were unenjoyable. And I found it really entertaining, actually, because I just didn't understand why he kept coming back.
Okay, and
he really didn't like us.
I wish I'd remembered the author who wrote this, but I was reading a Twitter thread where an author had written how at one point they were online in some way, and they'd always gotten negative comments from this person. Yeah. And when they finally met up with them later, I guess at a different stage in life, or maybe even in real life, that person had come to them and said, and the way they were talking to them, it was clearly that person thought they had a connection with the author and felt like this was like a reciprocal kind of relationship that was mutually enjoyable. Yeah. And it was so not, but that people engage with creators in a way that's maybe doesn't necessarily reflect the kind of internal conversation they're having with themselves about what they think is going on.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole idea of like parasocial relationships and stuff, right? Which is the idea of like forming these sort of one-way connections with people, where especially when somebody shares a lot of like personal information, right? When they're very accessible, how the nature of the relationship is super one way, and they can have never met you, but you have spent a lot of time sitting with their thoughts and their ideas and everything they put down. So when you meet them, you feel like you're meeting somebody familiar to you, right? And but like a friend, right? Right. And they don't know who you are, so you have this weird sort of one-way relationship with somebody, which didn't used to be possible the same way, right? Right. It's not how our brains are wired.
Well, I guess it wasn't possible. Definitely not possible in the same way, but you could. It definitely didn't. It was harder to fool yourself into thinking that it was something like that, because the interaction you have, like, say, with somebody's writings, because writing is very intimate, and it reveals a lot about people when you're writing about your ideas. That it's you could fool yourself into thinking, but it could feel that way, but it would be harder to convince yourself intellectually that it was that kind of thing, right?
People have become increasingly accessible, but even just, I guess even talking more, when I said our brains aren't wired that way, I mean, our brains weren't wired for, like, reading people's writings specifically either. They were wired for capacity for stuff, right? But all that stuff has happened close enough that we're not, we don't have new brains that have changed since in a significant way since writing has been invented.
Right.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Brian David Gilbert actually said something. He recently left Polygon. Brian David Gilbert's one of my favorite content creators.
Right.
And he said something.
He did that Pokemon song.
He did the Pokemon rap.
Oh,
He's
I
done
love
a
that
bunch
Pokemon
of great
song.
stuff.
Yeah,
he's really, he's a really cool, creative person. And he did something recently. He said something recently in an interview, which was interesting to hear. And he was just talking about how YouTube comment sections, right, are half. This isn't exactly how you phrased it, but this is what I sort of took away from it. So,
right.
Watch the interview if you want, for his actual words, but this is going to be like a paraphrase version that has like half my thought, half his.
Right.
Which is that YouTube comment sections are like a weird, both message to the creator, but also message to everybody else. Mm-hmm. So if you look in your own comment sections, he's like, everybody wants to be funny in them.
Yes.
So there can be, people who like your stuff or people who don't like your stuff, but it's a bunch of people talking about you. And I forget what the exact metaphor he used. It was something like the middle school play or something, but like the curtains closed and then you could hear everybody talking about you, right? Like, so it's a weird sort of experience where you're super accessible and there are spaces meant for like communication with you or about you. But a lot of people don't sort of... In the YouTube comment section, when you leave a comment, very rarely are people talking directly to the YouTuber in a way that they think they're going to respond. Right? When they're big. I think
right. When they're big. All right, so
yeah.
That's a good
our comment section is a little different because we do a lot more direct engagement and that's sort of our thing. Or one of our things anyways. But with bigger comment sections, people are making jokes about them. People are making jokes... people are saying things to other people who have finished watching the video, but they're saying it in a way that is very public and very front-facing and very accessible by the person that you're talking about. Yeah. So it's just interesting. It's a weird dynamic.
Yeah, because it's performative.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and then we were saying earlier about how everybody's trying to be funny. I think I'm going to expand on that a little bit. A lot of them are trying to be funny, and some of them are trying to be clever.
Yeah.
Because they want to, whatever way they want to present themselves in writing. Mm-hmm. And it made me think of John Scalzi, who's got a pretty famous, I don't know if it's famous. It feels like it's famous because I guess
one that you like a lot.
I like it a lot, and because maybe I just read a lot.
He's got a quote.
It's that the failure mode of clever is asshole.
Mm-hmm.
And it is so true. When you see all the people that are, because a lot of the ways that we are kind of funny in real life, it's because of the contrast of what we're saying compared to what people's expectations are of us.
Yeah.
And when you do that with strangers, you are almost certainly going to mess that up because they don't have a lot of expectations of you. So when you try to be that clever and try to be that, over the top, because a lot of that, it's because... Again, we're talking about expectations, right? When they expect one thing and they get something else from you, it can be very entertaining and funny.
Yeah. It's like, I don't know if you remember when the Fine Bros had that whole controversy with
I don't even know
React.
Who the Fine Bros are.
The Fine Brothers, they're like these big YouTube folks. They're one of the like companies on YouTube.
Okay.
But they're one of the sort of like in-between wave things where I don't actually know exactly how they came up. I don't know their history, but I know they've been around long enough that it was when it was more organic development as opposed to people like coming in and trying to break the algorithm where they seem like the Fine Brothers are specific people like Benny and Raffi Fine,
right.
Who are at the front of it. It feels sort of like Rhett and Link, right? Where they're one of the companies that came up sort of more organically, where they reached success and then they turned YouTube into a business, and then it sort of developed from there, and not like sort of people coming in saying, "Well, what do we do to get good at this YouTube thing?"
Right.
But they had this whole thing.
So they asked that question later.
Yeah,
is the point. Okay.
Yeah, and they had that sort of. It was about the content first, I think. I'm not 100% sure. It's just the sense that I get from them is that's what it is. But I haven't looked up their history. But they had this whole thing where I think they tried to trademark the use of the word react in the context of like reaction videos for YouTube. I don't remember if it was specifically trademarked, but it was something they were trying to, there was some amount of propriety that they were trying to establish over it. and they wanted to do like this affiliate program thing where you could like partner with them and give them money, and they were supposed to provide it was some unclear but relatively low value for you to use like their React format for reacting to videos.
Right.
And everybody got really, really mad at them, and it was a big conversation, and a bunch of people, like they lost like hundreds of thousands of subscribers, maybe millions, I don't remember. But I bring this all up because that was sort of a moment in time with that whole internet dogpile where it seemed like everybody was coming after them. And I'm bringing this up because one of the people that I knew at high school at the time, when this went on, just posted a comment because they were losing subscribers so fast. So a bunch of people were making variations of this joke. But my friend from high school was one of the earlier people to make it, which was they were hitting milestones in reverse. So they were at like 8.5 million, and then they hit 8 million subscribers, and they hit like 7.5 million or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, my friend posted, "Congratulations on 8 million subscribers, on reaching 8 million subscribers on their way down." And that comment got like 1,000 likes, or like 1,500. Cause when it starts getting promoted, there's sort of that natural snowball effect.
Right.
And it's just that, like that was a comment that the Fine Brothers probably read. Right, for how highly it was featured, or I don't know how many likes everything was getting, but it was, people were trying to be funny, and it does, like, you hear the story, and it's funny, and it feels kind of cool that that comment got so many likes, even when, the Fine Brothers, I don't read something like what they were doing as, like, being evil or fundamentally bad.
Right.
I think the worst thing you could say is maybe they were a little greedy, but they paid very dearly for it in public opinion and subscribers and all the metrics that counted. And so, I think that the response and the amount of vitriol that was thrown their way was almost certainly undeserved.
Right.
At least to some
over
extent.
the top.
Yeah. I mean, people were sort of meting out their own version of justice, right? But, it was fun and enjoyable to participate and like be a comment that got like 1,000 likes. As like these people saw like a significant portion of the like base that they had spent years accumulating like disappear overnight. And it's just that is like a weird dynamic to have. Right? Of like that level of being accessible, and it's not like people haven't been like canceled or boycotted or anything before. It's just, you're saying something on their content, and it's like if you could like stick sticky notes on art at an art gallery, right? And then people could like put like thumbs up on it.
Oh my god! Can you imagine that? A comment section
so
in a museum?
you like walk up to the Mona Lisa, and there's this big comment that's been framed next to it that says, "This looks stupid. I don't know. I don't like this." And there's a bunch of like green stickers on it. Like it's not. It's really weird when you like take a step back and look at it.
Yeah, I like that joke though. There's so many different variations on it, but I don't know why it just occurred to me. There's sort of two in that same category joke. There's two big Trump variations. There's the one where he's making the joke inadvertently. Where he's had 3 tweets that say, "Congratulations, the Dow Jones has hit whatever 1,000 milestone," but he's made the same tweet with the same number 3 different times because it drops and then it comes back up. And it's supposed to be a big deal. And then the other joke is not necessarily sort of attributed to somebody commenting about Trump, but it's in that sort of neighborhood where, how do you make $1 million? What's the easiest way to make $1 million?
Like
start off with $1 billion. Yeah, like that. So, it's poking fun at the bankruptcies and stuff, how a lot of, not just Trump, but a lot of millionaires, part of it is the gamble, right? There's a lot of people who failed and a lot of people who've come back after failing, but it's the biggest part is taking the gamble. And for all the people who are successful, there's probably a bunch that aren't. Yeah, I love that joke.
Unrelated, but before we get into the comments, this same person was somehow shockingly good at Flappy Bird.
Oh god.
They could play it for like most of an hour, like maybe an hour. They were like, it scores in the hundreds.
Right.
It was to the point where like I think they could go just pretty much indefinitely, and it was just that eventually you have to make a mistake because that's just how like your thumbs work, or like you'd run out of phone battery.
You run out of energy in the muscles in your thumbs.
That's two things about a random person I knew in high school. Anyways,
we've actually got questions this week. We didn't even have
20 minutes in.
We didn't have to stretch that out, but that was interesting though.
Okay, so this one comes from R3L14N, and they say, "Thanks for answering my question, guys. I really appreciate it, especially as a returning player. Also, as a fiction writer, I really enjoy the talks about books and different literature inputs. Not to mention, I found it ironic how you guys had a whole discussion about grammar in the middle of answering my question. I'd definitely love to hear more input on writing and literature-related stuff in the future. Maybe you guys could talk about what things you look out for whenever you read something. I also wanted to ask if you guys ever considered making a tier list for the game, whether character or gear-oriented. Simple tier lists could really help out newer players who are trying to figure out which characters to strive for. Your laundry is ready, by the way."
Yes, that was the alert from LG.
Yeah, so this is a good question.
I like it in so many different levels because it gives us an opportunity to talk about different things.
Yeah.
The biggest one for me is, the one thing I really hated about high school English was that puritanical idea that you value escapist literature different than what's the opposite, like serious literature where there's something meaningful to be learned.
Yeah, something that has some sort of objective merit somehow.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest crock of poop that we were ever given in high school. And I think escapism is not a bad thing. It's a great thing. And what it does is it opens the world to you in so many other different ways.
Yeah.
And I think what I look for when I read, I am looking for something different. Whether I want to just completely escape what's going on now, or whether I want to get out enough to come at the world from a different place, so that I come at it from a different angle, so I get a different perspective. I want to see... Sometimes I just want something that's familiar and comfortable and good, and sometimes I want to have an experience that's completely different. Sort of like... whether it's an emotional experience or just some fun, whatever. Like, that's what I'm looking for.
I think it's hard to reduce like what's good about a medium down to like a set of specific things that I look for, because I don't know if there's any one rule that I could say that I need to have in a book to enjoy it. Right. And so I don't know if there's anything that I look for. I think the thing, because I was thinking about it, and the thing which I think most often, and maybe always, but I don't even know about that, is some sort of emotional or fundamental believability, the ability to buy into something. Right? And so usually that's like having characters that are constructed in a way that makes them feel possible or plausible, right? The not necessarily like believability of plot or structure or what's happening, right? Because there's, a lot of books that need you to suspend disbelief in a variety of ways, right? But I think for most good books that I've read, you want some emotional core and some believable emotional core in the characters. But that even then, I don't think that's a hard and fast rule, because I think you can have characters that are caricature. You can have, like, especially in like books that are meant to be more humorous, right? I think you have people show up, right, in media where you don't always actually need to have somebody who feels like a real person, right? You don't necessarily need an emotional core.
I'll give an example of that, for me at least. Dirk Gently.
Yeah.
That was so much fun. It was different. It was enjoyable. I didn't have to really engage, at least in the first episode. Well, maybe not. That's not true, actually, because his sister, there was a little bit of that.
Yeah. There is a certain amount of emotional core.
That's true. That's true, actually. Yeah.
Okay, like a game that I liked a lot that didn't necessarily have particularly believable characters was Control. Which was a really enjoyable game.
You're gonna have to do the lifting here, because I've never heard of it. Never
it was very conspiracy. It's the conspiracy one. I showed you with the redacted documents and everything, and the really good physics.
Oh, okay.
Like, it looked just gorgeous. The main character wasn't particularly believable. It's this weird conspiracy thing where you're in the Federal Bureau of Control, which is this like secret hidden building in the middle of New York, and one of the main people that you interact with is a janitor who might be a god or something, and half the stuff he says is weird, arcane, like not gibberish, but like oracle style, almost like
Yoda.
More harder to understand than Yoda.
So just sort of opaque enough that
Yeah.
that kind of where they predict things that almost certainly come true because you just have to interpret it a different way because that ambiguous.
Yeah, and even like the characters who are like just working like desk jobs or whatever, or who are working and who are very like business-like, are, you know, dealing with like a rubber duck that can bend space-time and stuff like that. So there's nobody who's really, you know, and for the people who have adjusted to it being their day-to-day, I don't know if there's anybody who's like a fully buyable character as an emotional core, and the main character doesn't react in the main character is clearly not a surrogate for the player, because they have motivation and they have information that you don't know, and they're not reacting to what you're seeing in the same way that you are. Right? And in a way that is very clear and deliberate. And so, you know, I didn't go through that and go, you know, I really buy exactly what she's feeling. I'm like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know why she's reacting this way. Right. This is weird. You know, maybe if I figure out enough, this might make more sense to me. Why her emotions are like this, but I don't think I actually got through and never got like that point where I'm like, now everything makes exact sense why she's responding exactly this way. But that was fine because it was a really enjoyable piece of media, and that wasn't what it was about. And so I think like that's why it is so hard, because I think even saying that like a book was enjoyable, because I don't think everything you read is enjoyable, and some stuff feels important to read or significant or otherwise really well done without enjoyable being the word that I would ascribe to it. Yeah. Right?
Well, and you touched on it a little bit too, right? Sort of, you hinted at it, you came around at it from a different way, but maybe it's worth saying explicitly. I think a lot of times it has to do with what you're bringing to it. Yeah. And depending on where you are at that given moment, different things are going to be just right for you. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think it's so interesting that the really best, the things that stand out, not necessarily just the good enough, but the stuff that's really great is the stuff that you said this earlier, you touched on this earlier, where it's worth coming back to. Yeah. And that you can get something different from it each time, so that the sort of the revisiting value is really high. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, so yeah, for sure. I don't think there's any one sort of thing that you can say.
Interesting thing is that's almost not even a hard or fast rule either. I have one piece of media specifically that can come to mind that has no replay value. It's a game. Yeah. But has no replay value, but is still one of my favorite games of all time, which is Her Story. You can't play that game again.
So, yeah, so there's different axes. All right, so this comes back to the same... I mean, it's kind of neat that the two questions that R3L14N asked tie in together, right? Because you're talking with different axes. And that applies to the tiers of which are the... tier list for the game.
So, like, character tiers or like, gear tiers or and whatever.
I'm not sure that an accurate tier list is actually possible. I think sometimes... Oh, not today.
Very professional.
So, there's going to be... So, aside from maybe Injustice 2 Superman or Arkham Knight Batman, neither of which is easily attainable, right? They're, like, Injustice 2 Superman, maybe some of the rare packs and maybe some of the challenges and stuff. In Arkham Knight Batman, again, maybe the rare packs and the Gotham one that never comes back. Yeah. No one else has very much separation where you're talking about a single ungeared card, and if you're talking about them at similar stat levels, because here's the thing too, right? You talk about different goals at different stat levels. You can see from our example, we're playing a Flashpoint team at level 5 consistently. You don't need to max them out to make them a really good character. Oh, somebody's really persistent. Yeah, sorry. We're not going to be answering that call right now. So, if you're going to talk about what's going to give you the best chance of winning, the game is built in such a way that you could potentially finish the game with the single-player mode with store-bought cards that are available, that are unlocked from the very beginning. Yeah. Or you could do really well in Survivor, again, with store-bought cards. Mm-hmm. And you could, because matchmaking is good as long as you play with them right. You could same, right? Mm-hmm. I think every aspect. Survivor too.
Yeah, and separate from the axes that can make a character good, like them being more fun to play, them providing an interesting challenge, them being more, mechanically engaging versus, simpler, more dumbed down. There's also the fact that so many people are not contingent just on who's in their team, but contingent on so many things, right? So the only things that are really static are the way that their passives work, the way that their speed is, right? Like little pieces of information about quirks of how they play, like the number of combo ender hits they have, right? And then like their specials and how their specials mechanically work, like what effects that they induce, whether they can hit one or multiple characters, where their damage is loaded, but other than that, there's a lot of stuff about them which is totally variable. Ooh, we're getting a visual glitch right now.
Yeah.
But so you
the hard
think
part will
about
be winning this fight without being able to see what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you think about the gear, right, that they have. You think about the characters that they're with. You think about whether or not they've been augmented for crit chance and crit damage.
Right.
Whether or not their health or damage has been changed too.
Right.
Because you can make most characters don't have a stat distribution that's so off kilter that you can't make them balanced attack and defense if you want,
right,
or can't actually make one higher than the other. I think most characters, or I shouldn't say most, but at least a lot of characters, you should turn off notifications on your phone.
Yeah, now it would be the part of my brain that it would take to be able to do that would take me totally out of this conversation.
That's fair. But the so you can totally sort of force them into whatever stack configuration you want, right?
Yeah.
And then how you gear them up makes them so different too. So the problem is that it's the idea of saying that they're this good and this much better than somebody else is assuming so many other things.
Right.
And you can say that like you have to take it at whatever the sort of largest unit is, where you have to say who's the best, team then, with a specific gear layout and a specific augmentation and a really specific configuration. But it's really hard, because even at that point, is it like who has the highest stats? Who's the best for single player? Is it who's the best for survivor? Is it who's the best for online multiplayer? And then if you are trying to pick who's the best for online multiplayer, that is all in context and in conversation with how many battle points they get, right, and what the average person you're fighting is. And that is based off of like the meta and what people are putting in their defensive. And so everything is so sort of interconnected.
It's conditional.
Even if you said, assuming 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, like if you started a video with like 10 minutes on all the assumptions that you're making for it, it still would be sort of our best guess based off of what we'd played up till that point.
Right.
And that is why it's so hard to just do a tier list. I think, it's possible probably to do it more broad strokes, but at the end of the day too, if a lot of who's good is not available in the store, what a tier list would be, less than a tier list, what you'd want is probably like a guide for like who to get in what order, for like where to focus your energy as a new player would make a lot more sense than saying here's who you're shooting for, because the accessibility of any given character is also variable, especially when the better characters tend to be challenge characters or online rewards, where we can't, you can't really work towards those. You just have to do the best when you have the option to get them. Yeah. So really, for a new player, the best stuff to get is just what's there for you. So all the challenges, everything that you can scoop up, the best stuff that you can scoop up without spending real money is always the best stuff for you. And, when it's all timed, you're just going to scoop up whatever you can while you're playing, while you have time anyways. There's not a lot of insight that we could provide. And since we've played the game, when it was in a very different state than it is right now, like before Gears, right? Where we started a lot of our accumulation of money and credits and everything long before there was as many things to spend it on as there is today. So we don't actually have that perspective to know what you should get in what order, because we only know what we got in the order that we got it, and half of the stuff that we spent credits on wasn't even there in the first place when we were spending credits.
But I think we can make a pretty good educated guess based on having everything and having the chance to play with everything to know ultimately where you end up is what you'd want to strive for. And that's also making an assumption that you want to win. Because part of it will be play with characters that you like. I mean, this doesn't exist in a vacuum. The reason why Injustice is so much more successful than WWE Immortals is because there's so many more comic book fans than wrestling fans. So the characters in this game...
Are there more comic book fans than wrestling fans? I don't know if that's true.
I think so. And if you're talking about the engagement in the media and how often the number of people say watch the Avengers movie. Right?
Maybe. What I would say is that more comic book fans transfer over to this, and there is more inherent cachet and value as playing as the comic book characters in this game than there is like playing as your favorite wrestler in WWE Immortals.
So this is why, I mean, without doing a study analysis and looking at the numbers, I'm going to go on a limb here and say, I think, I still believe it, whether it's true or not. I still think that there's, the best evidence we've got for this is that WWE Immortals failed and Injustice is still running. Yeah. The original one is still running years later. But I guess the point still stands, though. If we've already got people who have something or bring something to the table, to the game, because they've already got some sort of emotional connection with these characters, play the characters you like. Mm-hmm. I remember when I started, the one big deal that was when I could afford to buy Regime Flash outright from the store instead of having to wait to get them from a silver pack.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting, because it touches on all of it, right? Like it's all those things that we talked about in terms of from the beginning of this talk about media and what makes it good and how you engage with it and what you want from it and what your expectations are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there we go. I think that was everything for that. Mm-hmm. Definitely talked about it long enough. Our next comment comes from Ishfish, and they say, do you guys have a favorite character that isn't one of the best characters? Mine is Arkham Knight just because he looks cool and a special 2 is fun. And is there a character that isn't as viable anymore that you wish had a boost? And so this is exactly what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So, to Ishfish, Arkham Knight is one of the best characters. I mean, most enjoyable to play with, right? Best being, adding positively to their experience with the game.
Yeah.
Right? And to me, that is the best. I think whatever makes you enjoy it the most is the best thing for you. And it is just like a case-by-case basis of best.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Mine is Elseworld Flash. I think the problem is, I love playing with him. If you look back on our old videos, you'll see so many where we played Elseworld Flash, Containment Doomsday, and Regime Green Lantern.
Yeah.
And it was a combination of both the meta shifting away from basic damage dealers and the fact that his passive was a little bit nerfed that made him less viable. I'd love to play with the Elseworld Flash team again.
Yeah, and I don't have a specific answer for this. There's characters that I feel like I enjoy a lot, but don't specifically enjoy like playing more, which is I like the Lobo characters just because, our avatar is Lobo.
Yeah. I
like Regime Black Adam because he was my first gold, and I think he is pretty fun. I do like playing with the Flashes a lot in general because they're nice and fast even when they're not the best. I like Ares for when he first came out and was just so good, like unreasonably good.
Yeah.
And then Red Lantern Hal Jordan is my answer for both characters that I like who aren't the best anymore, for what he used to be, and also characters that could use a boost.
Yeah.
Because they cut him down in his prime.
That's I like that expression.
Yeah. So there we go. Is there anybody who isn't viable anymore who you wish had a boost?
It's just Elseworld Flash.
Yeah?
Really just, I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. I used to play that team so much, and I've always liked the Flash characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so there we go. Our next question comes from another casual creator, and they say, I don't know if this is too out of the way, but what are your thoughts on the raid that happened to the United States Capitol? I don't know much about it myself, but I got my info through another YouTuber called Donut Operator, mainly about the arrests and sadly an officer who died because of the people. So this definitely isn't too out of our way. This is something...
this is our wheelhouse.
We were going to talk about it no matter what. I don't know if it's our wheelhouse. I don't know if that's fair to say, but it's something that we do anyways, whether or not... we're the best people to be talking about it, which, I mean, we're not the best people.
We're not.
For sure.
We're not. We're just happy to talk about whatever.
Yeah. And I have a lot of thoughts about it. I don't know how many of them are, like, packageable in a way that makes sense to share here. Not that I'm not willing to share them. I think one takeaway, is that there's been a lot of comparison, to how these insurrectionists, I think is the word that I'm probably most comfortable using.
Seditionists?
With what happened. There's been a lot of talk about, in comparison to, Black Lives Matter protests.
Right.
Right? And so I think, first off, I'm coming from a perspective where this is totally different. They're, not comparable in any significant way. I think there's a lens where you can look at surface level similarities that really misses the point, of ways that they're similar, but they're clearly different actions for different ends in different levels of stuff. But one of the things that a lot of people, a sentiment that I've heard expressed, is that it is really shameful and clear and obviously racially motivated, to look at the difference in how police handled what happened in the Capitol versus what happens when, like, Black Lives Matter protesters do something that the police feel they need to respond to, right? And so a lot of people saying, if, it was black people, there would be people getting shot, there would be people getting killed, there would be way more arrests. The fact that there was, like, so few arrests on the day, the fact that they were just ushering people out, like, without any sort of threat of violence. There was very limited, like, tear gas used and whatever.
Helping them down the stairs?
Yeah. And it does frustrate me to see such a disparity in response. And my problem with it is that I don't think... Okay, there are some ways in which the police clearly were misorganized and mishandled what happened on the Capitol. But in terms of violence and the level of force used in the response, I don't think they mishandled that, other than, doing things that weren't maybe properly ensuring the safety of the officers who were going in. I would like to see, because for the role that I think the police serve, I would like to see everybody handled peacefully. I would like to see, whenever there's anybody who's not in active danger, right? I would like to see, that exact same thing that happened on the Capitol happened to Black Lives Matter protesters. And I don't think that, people should be getting batoned. I don't think, these large crowds should be, having munitions used on them, right? And all this stuff. And I think there's a lot of anger, right? Looking at this clearly racist difference in response between the two. And I wish that the same affordances were being made for, black people and allies who are trying to have people not be murdered. And I wish there was as much care and consideration for their situation as was shown to the people who stormed the Capitol to try to do a coup. Right?
Yeah, it's interesting, because what you just said made me think of a couple things. And I think it definitely is. It is frustrating to see it. But I feel this way about, say, if you go to see a doctor to get a diagnosis or something, right? And people are afraid to go because they don't want the diagnosis. It was happening, but it was happening in a way that wasn't so obvious. And I feel like that maybe by making it so public, where it's so obvious and that you can't ignore that there is this disparity that was happening all along. It's not like this is new.
Yeah.
But it was just happening in the shadows so that people could convince themselves that it was no big deal.
Yeah, not a single Black Lives Matter protester was surprised in any significant way by the difference. People might be surprised by the disparity, by the brazenness of it, but nobody was out there going, oh, I didn't think that they wouldn't respond in the exact same way. Everybody expected a version of what happened.
Right. And the other related point is that you make very clearly is that when there's inequality, and there's sort of a bad faith argument that when there's inequality, that somehow you're if you want sort of if you want to fix this disparity, that somehow you're a hypocrite for wanting it, because they're coming at it from the perspective that everybody should be brought down, when it's the exact opposite. And this is the same as the minimum wage argument, where you see some people are getting treated very poorly, and that the fact that you're seeing this difference and you're complaining about it isn't complaining. You're not complaining. None of us are complaining that those white protesters at the Capitol should have been beaten and killed and blinded with rubber bullets. The argument really is everybody should be treated better. And same with the wages, is when the people don't get the same way, is that when people are making a lot of money and other people are living below poverty level, it's that, hey, those people at the poverty level should be paid a living wage.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest argument I think there is for minimum wage, that if you have a business that requires you to pay somebody less than enough to live on if they work full time, that business model is flawed.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much. To me, it's very much two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, so I think, what happened there was an example of just some of the worst parts of America showing themselves, right? Like the violence that happened was needless, right? There was some people who were clearly really reveling and really enjoying the experience of trying to destabilize democracy, which sucks. That's not great. And, Trump's actions were really irresponsible.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of Republican politicians that are really directly responsible for what happened there, right?
Right.
Both in what they said, leading up to it, but also just with the political climate that they've been cultivating, with everything that they say. And so, it is really unfortunate. It was a senseless loss of life for everybody who died. And for how well the insurrectionists were treated, it is very hard to have sympathy for them, but I think it's important that we still do. Because, I don't think that everybody there deserves, the olive branch. I think there should be consequences for the actions of people there did harm, right? But I think at the end of the day, I am not for any needless harm coming to anyone, and I don't think it's necessarily unfair. I'm saying that from a position of privilege, right? I'm not upset because people are killing my community as directly for anything. So I understand a real anger and a real desire for justice, whether that comes in a sort of more revenge tinged perspective. But for me personally, I just, all I want is whatever steps lead us to the best outcomes, right? So I don't want these people doing terrible things. And if punishment is how you deter other people from doing them, if there's a certain amount of consequence that needs to happen, right, to help fix this, then I think that makes sense. But the problem is, the good news is we're not doing policy, and the issue is that I don't know what the best step forward is here. Right.
I mean, you touched on that again too, right? I think that's a bigger conversation, way more than we've got time for in this video or on this channel, to break down the issues of, and separating them out of deterrent and justice and punishment, right? They're all sort of different kinds of things and complicated.
Yeah, so I think what happened there was terrible, and I think I've seen a lot of people really mad about it, and I think that anger is super justified, and I don't know if I have any other specific thoughts to share now. I think that's maybe the larger shape of my thoughts about it.
Yeah.
So hope that addresses it.
And we actually had a bunch more questions. We're out of time.
We did, yeah. We talked too much.
We'll save it for next week.
Okay. So to finish up, I would like to give a shout out to Eliza number 15, Caton. The last thing you'd want in your Burger King burger is someone's foot fungus. And this shout out was brought...
What?
It's a reference. I'll show you after.
Okay.
And this shout out was brought to you by Chills, everybody's favorite creepy list YouTuber.
Okay.
We'd also like to give a thank you to everybody who supports us on Patreon.
That would be Consul Peasant and Edwoon at the top tier, Last Word. Mohammed Albshaiti at the Your Message Here tier. Shawn Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Maule, Michael DeVries, Brandon C., Irvin Ruiz, and Eddydoo at the credited level. And Chris Wolf, Scarlet Danny, Awesome Gamer 2for1, Pavu RS, Gavin Malott, and Isfar E at the gratitude level.
There you go. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Komoda.